Welcome to the Seven Figure Builder Show. My name is Julie Baranek, founder of Seven Figure Builder, where we help high achieving CEOs connect with their dream clients to scale to seven figures and beyond. And I'm here today with my friend Steve Anderson. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Julie, how are you today?
I am fabulous. I am so excited to chat with you today.
I am too. I'm fun to be here.
Awesome. So, first and foremost, where in the world are you?
I'm just outside Nashville. We've been here about, I guess, 23, 24 years now and love the area. We were just chatting before we started. I grew up in Maryland suburbs out of DC, so familiar with kind of that area also.
Awesome. And I am a huge Nashville fan. So, we will have to connect next time I'm out that way or you're this way. Either way,
Absolutely.
we'll have
That'd
to
be
grab
great.
some coffee. So, for those that haven't had the pleasure to meet you yet, can you tell us just a bit about what you do with your business?
I certainly can. And I would say there's kind of two pieces or parts to it. Kind of what I do and have done for my entire working career is in the insurance industry. So early on, selling insurance to businesses primarily, and through kind of that experience, got very interested in the technology aspect. And so 25 years ago, started my own consulting firm around technology consulting for independent insurance agents in the United States. Certainly a small niche, but one that I have, I don't want to say conquered per se, but I'm very well known for what I do in that niche, which I actually should be the goal for anybody, right? Just be well
Absolutely.
known, be somebody who does a good job. So I've been fortunate to build that reputation. So the other side is a book I wrote and published a couple of years ago on Amazon and the letters to shareholders that Jeff Bezos wrote. So um, they are related. We can talk about that, but kind of two separate things that I do.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm excited to dig into this because yeah, Amazon is a monster that came from little roots, right? Like there's such a journey there and so much to
There's such a
unpack.
journey, and I always remind people, especially smaller startups, Bezos started in a garage, kind of typical entrepreneurial journey. And obviously he got somewhere much, much bigger. And not everybody wants to do that. But I do believe there are things any business can learn from what Bezos did and what Amazon did in order to grow the way they have and really service their customers, which I think is a key point.
Yeah. It's funny. I was actually on another podcast a couple of days ago, and we were talking about Amazon and their model and just how it's intriguing to me how they have this whole model. And of course, they have no products necessarily. Like it's the relationship of the client, it's the trust that you're going to get the shipping, right? It's the return policy, it's the customer service. Like it's literally everything around the
Yep.
product. And the product relationship is something totally different. And it's so intriguing to me that, you can build a whole business model around nothing, but like around something, obviously, right?
Or selling, yeah,
Right.
but that focus, and certainly, one of the principles I talk about in my book is customer obsession, and that's Bezos' term, and you see that throughout the history, even today. They're um, real. I mean, I always struggle a little bit because every business knows they have to take care of customers, but obsession is such an interesting word because it goes further, right? Maybe too far sometimes, right? I absolutely can acknowledge that, but somebody's obsessed over doing something, they're just so focused on the customer. And that I think is one of the key things that Amazon has built in their in their culture that has allowed them to grow and allowed them to build those relationships. And the way they would phrase it is build trust with the customer. That if they
Totally.
say they're going to deliver it in 2 days or less, they actually do. Now, they're not 100% perfect, but most of the time they get it right.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And before we like dive into the book, what caused you to write that book, right? Like you were in the insurance industry. There's obviously a correlation there, but what was that journey for you?
So part of my technology work in the insurance industry, and as we all know, insurance is trying to help avoid risk, reduce risk, transfer risk, right? Risk is a big part of what the industry does. And what I realized is with technology continuing to develop so rapidly, that the biggest risk when I started this thought process, agencies make, now I think it's businesses make, is actually not taking enough risk. And
Mm.
so very counterintuitive, certainly to the industry and what I've been part of for a long time. And actually, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and I will say, entrepreneurs are often thought of as risk takers, but it's not always the case. And it's how do you take risk strategically to grow? And I think that's where Bezos has a lot that we can learn from in terms of they took a lot of risk. He took a lot of risks from day one. I mean, think about it. Back in 1994, nobody knew you could sell books over the internet, but he had this vision of how to do it, and he worked toward that. And his vision always was more than books, and now it's everything, right? Just about, not completely, but just about.
Yeah.
So that was kind of that idea. So I started researching companies that had been very successful or no longer here. We kind of know those names, right? And I started asking why, what happened, where did they lose their way? And then looking at companies that have been successful and continue to be successful, and what have they done different? And so as I was looking at those, I came across Amazon and the shareholder letters. And, typically shareholder letters from CEOs are boring. I mean, they're kind of, yeah, we did all these great things and et cetera, et cetera. Bezos was different. And what I ended up doing is reading all the letters at the time, one right after the other, as a narrative. And I realized there were threads that went through the letters. And it was kind of those threads that started me thinking about what principles did Bezos and then Amazon use to actually get to where they are, and can they be used by others? And I think my answer is yes, they can. And that's what the book is about.
Awesome. So what were, if you can share some of those threads that you found, like that, you can apply it
So,
forward?
so I have 14 principles. That's a lot. And I have grouped them into 4 cycles that I think businesses always go through. So test, build, accelerate, and scale. So early on, we all are testing, right? We have an idea, we think it's great, but does the market think it's great? Will a customer pay us for solving a problem that they have? And then we get some success with that. So we start building on that success, we accelerate that success, and then we scale. And even in the scale, for example, the question is, how does a company like Amazon scale to where it's at 1.2, 1.3 million employees worldwide and still maintain some of that core idea, core culture? And so there's some areas there. So I won't talk all 14. We don't have time. I'll handpick a few that seem to resonate with people when I talk to them. I think first is in the test cycle, the first principle is encourage successful failure. And this is where risk taking comes in. So you don't typically see the word successful and failure in the same phrase. But Amazon, from the very early days, had this process of experimentation leading to invention. And Bezos says multiple times in his letters, again, one of those threads, that if you're experimenting and you're not going to fail, I mean, it's going to work, it's not an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to experiment and try to build and invent something new, you have to embrace failure, because that's part of the process. And, that again, culture of being willing to test. And little side note, I actually think a lot of the emphasis in today's world and conversation around companies needing to innovate is actually backwards. They need to experiment and invent, so then they can innovate, right? So I think the companies that I looked at that were no longer successful or literally gone weren't willing to invent something new because they were protecting their initial success. And so, again, lots of concepts within that, but encourage successful failure is certainly a key idea. I think another one in the build cycle is what we've already mentioned, is obsess over customers. And again, in the 1997 letter, which is the very first shareholder letter, they went public in 1997. He has three main kind of sections to that letter. One whole section is on customer obsession. And the way he phrased it is, we will obsess over customers. And you again look at how they've implemented that. That's certainly a focus. And, kind of like Julie, you alluded to, when people think of Amazon, or when I ask them, why do you shop on Amazon? It's easy. That's the most common answer. And I get my stuff when they say I'm going. I mean, literally, I ordered something a few days ago and it came the same day. Because Nashville's a bigger area. That's not available in all places. But it's that obsession to continuing to refine how they deliver packages to, again, have that customer come back because the experience is so good.
A couple.
So I'm going to take a breath. I'll let you interject. I could keep going. So
No, I have lots of thoughts of all that you're talking about, but no, I love that. To your first point of, successful failure, like my background is IT. So I'm from the tech world. So I'm of the mentality of fail fast, right? Like that's what's ingrained in me, because you want to try something, see if it's going to work, and fail fast. So you're not going to waste money and time and going down a path, right? And see if it's going to work, and then continue. If not, then learn from it, and, continual innovation and constant improvement, and just making things better all the time. But with the risk you mentioned, at the beginning, there's risk of stagnation and getting left behind. And I think for the companies that you mentioned that aren't with us anymore, like I think of the Kodaks and like all the different companies that
Kodaks, Blackberries, now Bed Bath and Beyond. My wife was so sad, all her coupons were like worthless.
Right? Oh God, I had so many of them. I love them.
Well, she had this kind of roll. It looked like her money roll, I think. So, but again, stagnation, not willing to adapt or not able to adapt and change a business model that built them, but no longer was successful.
And the other thought I had is with the obsession with customers. And I saw just a little clip. I have to go back and look at it. But it was a little clip of the CEO, an interview with the CEO of Zillow. And he said that the key to his success was the desire for voyeurism. Like people want to see inside of other people's houses, and like just to have that, which really, it struck me. I'm like, I see, like, we can get on a tangent of social media, but like Facebook success has been on voyeurism and narcissism and like people's desire for self. And, I saw that with Zillow. I'm like, that clicks. But for Amazon, to me, it's capitalizing on people's desire for instant gratification. To your point of like delivery the same day, which is mind blowing. And we have like, 2-day delivery. I'm in the sticks here.
Right.
But it's that instant gratification that they've really been able to capitalize on, and the being able to rely on it, right? That we can have confidence that if I order it today, it's going to show up when they say it's going to show up. Otherwise, that's the oddity if it doesn't.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So I would say another, and I'll just kind of jump through some of the cycles, but accelerate. One of the interesting principles there is high velocity decision making. And so again, Bezos almost has a whole letter just talking about decision making at Amazon. And he says there really are two types of decisions that a company makes. One type is bet the farm, really big decisions. And he said those you have to make slowly with as much information as you can possibly get. He said, but the problem is that most decisions are not that. They're easily reversible. And so And those decisions, he said, you should make fast with a team that is capable of making that decision. So meaning not a lot of bureaucracy. I mean, you think about, you mentioned you were in pharmaceuticals. You think about the levels of bureaucracy that anything has to go through. All that does is slow down decision-making, which slows down growth, right? So, and again, pairing that a bit with successful failure, if a decision is made that doesn't work out, you pivot, you change. You either change the decision, you go a different direction, you do something, but it's not consequential to the business, but it is beneficial to the business in the long term because you're moving faster. Again, move fast, break things, change, experiment, test. And you see that with Amazon all the time. I mean, you see them, I mean, people always are kind of amazed when they read about Amazon shutting down a program. And for me now, all that is, oh, that's an experiment that didn't work out the way they thought.
Yes.
Right. And then the question is, I wonder what's next. It's I mean, think about right now, they're big move into grocery and healthcare, for example, doing a lot of experimenting, trying to figure out what is that secret sauce. And again, back to customer obsession, how can we substantially improve the experience a customer has going to the grocery store? Right. So their just walk out technology gets rid of the self-checkout, which I actually hate typically because it doesn't work well. Right. So anyway, and that's somewhat of the beauty of the cycles and the principles is the principles stand on their own, but they all interact with one another too.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And so that, again, my brain goes back to the IT world where we always have a rollback plan, right? Like you can try something and you push out a deployment, not to get too techie, but you can always roll it back.
Yep.
And so I see that, with Amazon, that they take the IT principles and they apply it to the business world, right? Like make decisions fast and you have a plan that you can roll something back if you need to. And obviously that can be expensive depending on how big the decision is.
Well, and that's depending on the size of your business, you'll have to gauge, kind of what your risk tolerance point is. But the principle still applies.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I also think about, to your point of experiments, like Google Plus, right? Like that was one that didn't work out so well, but
not so well. I mean, again, I don't remember the number now, but I think Google's killed 25 or 30, big projects, right? That they rolled out, like Google Plus is a perfect example. Rolled out, didn't do what they thought it would, or didn't get the traction, and so kill it. Don't waste your time trying to keep pushing it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that goes back to your earlier point of, that experiment and research to begin with of what do your clients actually want from you? And then if that's not it, okay, we do something else to get in better alignment.
Well, and that leads me to say that Amazon uses a tool to help them with that, right? So and I always have to remind people listening, it's not like just throw something against the wall and see what happens. It's very intentional and strategic. So they have a tool called the Working Backwards document or the 6-page memo. There are a couple different names over the years for it, but Bezos in 2004 banned PowerPoint presentations at Amazon, period. Because he said people hide behind bullet points. And so people who are pitching an idea or wanting funding or, whatever, have to write literally a written document. And it became a maximum of 6 pages because people tried to fudge and, small font sizes and write all that kind of stuff. But the idea behind it is to write something down, you have to really think through it. So the first component of that is a future press release. When this project, product, service is launched, what's the press release going to look like and what's the customer benefit? So you write that right up front. And then you write a FAQ. What are all the questions internally and externally? What are customers going to ask? Why do I need this? What are internally people going to ask? How are we going to deliver this? And you answer those questions. And then you bring that document to the meeting. It's not sent out beforehand. and you hand it out, and the first period of time, 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, is spent reading the document as at the meeting, and then it's opened up for discussion.
Hmm.
And so very counterintuitive. Again, right? We think about, okay, we have a PowerPoint presentation, and then people are saying, well, what about this? Oh, I'm going to do that in the next slide, right? Well, now everybody's literally on the same page. And now you can have a discussion about questions, or what about the data, or I mean, whatever. But it's a really interesting process, and it helps flesh out all the potential problems as much as possible before you start the project.
Yeah, and you also get everybody's gut reaction at the same time,
Yep.
which is probably their most honest reaction.
Yes, exactly. And one of the principles is the leaders in the room go last, because they don't want to back to your point, they don't want to color, or, oh, if they think that, then I can't say this. They want that feedback from everybody.
I love that. That is awesome. And what else have you seen that, they do with Amazon and Bezos has done that like everyday business people can apply in their own businesses?
So the last principle in scale, in how you scale a large business and keep, is called believe it's always day one. And for Bezos, that has been a consistent thread again. So in the very first letter, he said, this is day one for the internet. And remember, this is 1997. It was. I remember back those days.
So do I.
It was day one for the internet. And he said, and for Amazon.com, if we execute well. And that idea of it being day one literally then appeared in every single shareholder letter he wrote. And it's usually at the last paragraph or the last sentence. And it's something like, it's still day one. It's always day one, even in the pandemic. And he said, even with all the challenges we face, it's still day one. Now, here's a story, and I'm gonna pause a minute so you can cut this if you want.
No, go ahead.
But I may go into your how did you say it? Lessons, tips. 3 questions. Yeah. So the tips you had said.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay. So the story is in 2016, Bezos was doing an all hands meeting in Seattle, a couple thousand employees, common event, quarterly, typically, state of the company, et cetera. And then he would open it up for questions from the employees at the end, and they would write them down on a note card, and he would go through them. The note card he looked at, and he smiled, and he said, I think I know the answer to this question. And the question was, Jeff, what does day two look like? So again, this is that idea. Let's think back to Bed Bath & Beyond or Blockbuster or BlackBerry or, any of those companies. What happened? Well, in Bezos' mindset, they became day two companies. And here's what he said about day two companies. Day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that's why it's always day one. Now, he went on, audience laughed and applauded and, et cetera. He went on to write about that in the 2016 shareholder letter, and he added some comments to it, which I think are maybe helpful. One is, he said, I'm more interested in how to fend off day two. I mean, what can we do as a company? And he said even Amazon is subject to that process. But he said there are 4 things that I think are key to maintaining day one or fending off day two. Customer obsession, we've talked about that. A skeptical view of proxies. Now, it goes on to explain proxies for him are processes and procedures that no longer serve the customer. Again, think about businesses that build a procedure that makes sense, but things change, but the procedure doesn't. Or how many times have you been on a call and said, well, I can't do that, customer service call, whatever. So constantly reviewing that and making sure they are correct and current. for the situation. So skeptical view of proxies. Third is eager adoption of external trends. So then go back to the technology. So, and he pointed out at that time, remember 2016, he said, these trends are usually easy to be aware of because they're written about a lot. He said a current trend is machine learning, which now we know as artificial
AI,
intelligence
right.
and whatever terms. I probably don't go down that rabbit hole, but it is a technology that is here that has been literally being developed for 60 years and kind of all of a sudden last fall, became much more visible. But it's there. So eager adoption of those external trends, not being afraid of it. And again, going back to experimenting. And then fourth, we've already talked about high velocity decision making to keep the business moving. Don't get stuck. And the phrase I wanted to mention when you talked about kind of risk taking, a phrase he uses is when businesses start in a day two process or start down that path, it could take them 20 years. But typically they start with unwarranted risk aversion. And I really like that idea, unwarranted, right? Sometimes it's warranted, but most of the time or a lot of time it's not.
Yeah, and I would think that unwarranted risk aversion would often come from fear of failure, that they made a too expensive decision that didn't end well, and then they want to
right? Yeah,
avoid that going forward.
And I do believe that employees aren't afraid of failure, but they are afraid of the consequences of failure. And if you have built a culture with consequences of failure, you're not going to get experimentation. And then you start down that path.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that, the thought that comes to mind is employees follow a leader, right? Yes. So there's different implications of failure at different levels, right? An employee failure is short-term, repercussions. A leader failure, you then lose the respect of your employees potentially. So that is way riskier if you haven't kind of built that into the fail fast. Right.
Yep. Exactly.
Interesting. So in the lessons that you've learned from, everything that you've been researching, how would you encourage business owners to have fun in their business? Like, is there any takeaways for that you would see?
Well, so my current business, we didn't really get into this detail, but my current business, so I took my consulting business, sold my IP, started a new business in conjunction with some industry partners, and now I'm CEO and running that business. So I kind of started over again. It wasn't really because I had all the stuff I was doing, but I think for me now as CEO and a larger team than I was used to, I was pretty much a couple of contractors and a one-man show, but now I've got a team and investment partners, right, all that kind of fun stuff. And what really comes to mind for me now is not taking yourself too seriously. Kind of the concept of work hard, play hard, and acknowledge. And again, my mindset now is I want failures, and I got to caution that a little bit. I want to have smart failures or strategic failures, right? I want to test. And again, we created a whole new platform. We had to pivot, about 10 months in terms of our pricing model. Okay. We had to pivot. Right. Let's figure out what works now. And we are down a really good path right now in terms of pricing model and revenue generation, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it's just part of the process. And so the phrase just keeps coming to mind is don't take yourself too seriously. And kind of what you said earlier with your employees, help them have some fun and take a deep breath, and it's okay. We'll get through this, and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And I think if you have that continual learning desire, then it's not personal, right? Like everybody pivots in their business. You would fall behind if you don't pivot in your business, and you
Right.
pivot because something didn't work. So like
Right.
they go together, and then you find a better way. And like that's, it all ties together with everything we've been talking about, of just continual learning, continual improvement, and just figure it out as you go,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm chuckling because as you can tell, I'm older. I'll just say that, at the other end of my career. And I'm chuckling because I took piano lessons when I was a kid and didn't continue them. And I regretted it for a very long time. And I decided not too long ago that I'm tired of regretting it. So I'm actually taking piano lessons right now.
I
Right.
love
So
that.
kind of that, I mean, keep learning, and who knows what other things will happen because of that, what other ideas will come, et cetera. So I'm a real firm believer in lifelong learning. I guess I'll say it that way. So
Yeah, no, 100% me as well. I know I have told this story on here before, but I had a passion for photography and I sucked. I was awful. Like I didn't know anything about it, but my kids were little and I knew I didn't want to pay for a photographer all the time.
Yep.
So I went out and learned how to be a photographer. Like I went out, I researched the best colleges out there that had some sort of photography degree. I looked up their curriculum. I looked at the books. I bought the books. I read the books. I trained myself in everything I could possibly do. Went to in-person training, and I ended up as a professional photographer doing weddings and events and equestrian photography. Like it became way bigger than just take pictures of
right.
it. But like there's, I read somewhere of somebody kind of hacking into Harvard's curriculum and like learning Harvard curriculum that way. But
Yep.
you can learn anything.
You can learn anything, and between YouTube and books and, there's a lot out there. No question.
Totally. So you've accomplished a ton in your career for sure, but how do you define success? What does that look like for you?
I would say influence. So I know, and money's important to some degree, but I don't define success by how much is in the bank. Sometimes that's not a good thing, but that's whatever. But I think it's again, part of and I have to say, this whole book project was an accident. I mean, it literally was just me being curious, and my wife is in the book business, so I had kind of an in. And my first iteration of what became the book was a white paper PDF giveaway executive summary of some of the shareholder letters. And I showed it to her saying, hey, I'm pretty excited about this. This has some really good stuff. And she sent it to the founder of the publishing company, and they both came back and said, this is a book.
Wow.
And I went, oh shit, I don't know how to write a book.
That wasn't what I wanted.
What? But that's been gratifying. And again, that kind of ties into success for me, is helping people see something differently that helps them and maybe changes their mind.
I love that. I love that. So what can people expect from you next? Do you have another book on the horizon that you might stumble into?
Well, so I would say a couple things. One is we're actually looking at going through the existing book and just updating, right? It's about, I guess, 3 years old now. The principles are still there. So this book continues to sell. It's been translated into 19 languages. I mean,
Wow.
it's done well, but numbers and some things like that, a few things have changed. And I said the book went through the 2018 letter. Bezos wrote the 19 and 20 letter. So those are not incorporated. So we're trying to figure out kind of wrapping it up, right, as the finished book of all the letters. So, and then I actually had an idea for another book prior to this that might get resurrected, and that's still in the future, but we're talking a little bit about what that might look like now.
Yeah. So are you going to hit on the exit strategy of Bezos in your new updated version?
Yeah. I mean, because it's really kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, and I will say this: I have a friend of mine here locally that does a lot of business coaching, and one of the things he said is that he transitioned in his business from CEO in the same way. and brought in actually his daughter into the CEO role. And what he said, talking about that transition, is ultimate success for a business is succession, right? Not having the business die when you leave because it's only you. And I feel that resonates with me when I look at Bezos and what he's doing. And I do frankly think he has other things he wants to get done. And, Amazon, certainly with the pandemic, took a lot of his time. And I think he was ready to hand that over to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, having been in the corporate world forever, like I've always thought the indication of your leadership capabilities is if your business can run without you.
Yep.
And so I see that very much there. Like the more they don't need you in the nitty gritty, the more of a leader you actually are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And even in my little kind of new venture here, that's what I work on is, in fact, I have a list of questions, does Steve really need to be involved?
Yeah.
And there are questions about, do you not have the information? Is it only something I can do? Is it, and there are some things that fall into that category, but trying to get people to not, because it's me and my ideas. I started this, but getting them to see, okay, there's lots of other sources now where you can go to find those answers.
Totally.
So,
yep. Yeah, I know. I always think back to like the 4-Hour Work Week. Like I love that book, and it helps you look at things differently, of like how to actually triage what you have to do.
Triage what you have. And very much so. I agree with that.
Yeah. So if you had the attention of the whole world for 5 minutes, what would you tell them?
I've thought of a couple of different answers for that question. And I think the one I want to say is, don't be afraid of experimenting. Protect the downside, right? It's not willy-nilly, who cares? And experimentation is what allows you to discover and invent what's next, or a solution to a problem, or a better process. And, if you're a leader in an organization, encourage your employees to do that. And I'll just reemphasize what I already said. I don't think employees are afraid of failure, but they are afraid of the consequences of failure. So if you create an environment that celebrates failure, and again, there are caveats around that, but celebrates failure, I think you're going to see a whole lot more invention and better growth, more engagement with customers than if you don't.
Yeah. And the key that comes to mind for that is like, there's a difference between critical analysis of this is not working and sheer incompetence. They're not one and the same. So failure can look like different things.
Well, and that reminds me of a phrase I use in the book, is that Amazon is intolerant of incompetence. So that's a different issue than experimentation and failure. Yep. So totally agree.
For sure. So how can listeners support you in your work? Where can they get the book and check out everything that you're doing online?
Well, surprisingly, you can get it on Amazon.
That's a great spot for it.
That is a great spot for it. The book website is thebezosletters.com. So there's some information there, and actually a small workbook that goes along with the book, because again, the purpose is to help people change or incorporate. So that would be there. And then in terms of social, LinkedIn is my primary platform. And so certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. Typically, I show up in a search with Steve Anderson Insurance or Steve Anderson and Bezos. And just let me know you listen to the podcast. I'll be glad to connect with you.
Absolutely. I love it. No, thank you, Steve, for being on. This was very insightful and really a lot of fun.
Good. Thank you, Julie, for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if you found value in this episode, please do share it. That's how people find us. And you can find me at sevenfigurebuilder.com. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.